Engagers, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of using games and gamification in our daily lives, for example, to learn what we are teaching. And I am Rob Alvarez. I work at IronHack, teach at IE Business School University, and so much more, and host this podcast. If you have an extra second, please go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list at professorgame.com/subscribe. Hey, Engagers, welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And we have a very, very special repeat, actually a second repeat guest who is Yu-kai Chou. He's very special not only because of, how special he is in the gamification world. Also, he was our episode number 1. So if you want to check out a very raw episode in that sense, from my side, Yu-kai was amazing. You can check that out in episode 1. We also had another episode on Yu-kai's framework called Remote. So if you type Yu-kai and Remote, you'll definitely find that on professorgame.com. However, well, first of all, Yu-kai, welcome once again to Professor Game Podcast. And are you prepared to engage?
I am prepared to engage.
Let's do this. Because, again, I'm very happy to have you back. As many of you might remember from a few past episodes, I am having a baby daughter, hopefully very, very soon. My wife is already over 8 months ready in the baking or in the making, however you want to say that.
Exciting times.
Thank you very much. And, talking about this, I've been hearing as well June's podcast for a bit, your friend June Loiza, right? Is that the right way to say it?
Yeah, June Loiza is the English J.
Exactly, June Loiza. So I've been hearing June's episodes. I've been listening to some of the things that he's been saying. I also mentioned, when I mentioned that, we're getting ready for a baby girl coming home, somebody, I'm trying to remember if it was Antonis who mentioned, said, I've heard as well Yu-kai mentioning some things around kids, and it might be interesting to talk a little bit about what's up with gamification in kids. And of course, you have experience from all perspectives, right? As a professional, as a parent, how old are the twins by now?
Yeah, so my twin daughters, Symphony and Harmony, are just about to turn 5 years old.
Wow, that's gone by fast. For me, I'm not sure if for you. Has that been the case?
It's pretty fast for me too. They have a saying, the days go by slowly, but the years go by fast.
That's true. Actually, there is a saying, I'm trying to remember who I heard it from. I think it was John Lee Dumas, that he was saying, like, people tend to underestimate when you're setting like objectives and, things towards the future. You tend to overestimate what you can do in a year, right? But you overestimate what you can do in a year and underestimate how much you can do in a decade or 5 years or sort of longer time. So that could kind of apply in a way of, what do you expect to happen in a short period of time?
Yep.
But Yu-kai, how's the experience of parenting? Like, let's maybe start with that. How's that hit you? Like, have you had any massive, well, I'm sure there's been plenty, but is there one thing that comes to mind when I say lessons from parenting? Is there that one thing that comes to your mind at this point?
I'll say one thing that somewhat surprised me, and I think parents do mention that here and there, is that how quickly they grow up, and everyone gives advice of, take more photos, record more videos. And, I feel like I've taken quite a few, every once in a while I'll take these photos. But then what's interesting is they do grow up very fast. And so those 1-year-old daughters, quickly, they're just replaced by some, like 2 people with the same name, but 2 years. Those 1 years are gone. They're literally like, in the sense, being kidnapped. And then they're replaced by 2 years old with the same names, but they have totally different personality. And those 1-year-olds will never get them back. They're only in our memories now. And, as you know, when kids get older in the teenager years, you show them their baby photos, they get embarrassed. So they don't even want to endorse those time periods. And so it's literally like your kids are constantly being replaced by slightly older kids. So I think capturing the moment and, just remembering the good times is very important as you go through the chaotic experience of parenthood.
That is amazing. And I love the way you say that they are being replaced constantly by sort of new personalities or new people almost.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one. So, Yu-kai, of course, you are definitely an expert in the gamification world. And when you think about gamification And of course, there's many lessons that you've learned as well as a parent that have to do with how kids interact and how they view the world, et cetera, et cetera. But is there, when you're thinking of gamification in kids, especially when you're thinking of your own kids, what could be some sort of, when you're doing something that has to do with gamification or has to do with gamification principles, maybe you have some objective you want to achieve. What could be perhaps a typical objective you set yourself to achieve when thinking about these things with your own kids?
Okay, so the first thing, as a high-level principle, I've often been in this internal debate because based on my background and our backgrounds, technically we could gamify every component of their life. So everything they should be doing is fun, exciting, engaging, all those things. However, I do feel like at one point they're going to be facing the real world. And the real world, most of that stuff is not engaging, gamified. And that's when you need to have that discipline muscle trained. Basically, things you don't want to do, but just suck it up and do it. And so sometimes I go through the debate about how much should I make things just engaging and motivating so they just want to do it versus times where I just said it that they don't want to do it, but they should just exercise the discipline and do it. So I go through those debates, and I think it's a balance in many things. And so my goal is to help my kids grow into people who have strong self-esteem, who focus their energy and their emotional energy on productive things, not unproductive negative things. So I actually have a little framework with them. I basically say useful versus useless things. So it's like, I just, since they're 1 year old, there's a bucket. Like throwing a tantrum is not useful. Talking is useful. All right. And then I tell them regularly, you want to do useful things, not useless things. And I think a big part of that is just teaching them how to move closer towards useful things as opposed to useless things. And I mean, there's the whole body of literature. I teach them about consequences. I often let them know that a lot of things that happen is based on their actions. So I'd say, hey, you're choosing for this negative outcome. I would tell them, why are you choosing this negative outcome? And then they might not listen. And then when it happens, hey, look, you chose this negative outcome. I already told you, 20 minutes ago, this is what's going to happen. Next time you want to choose good outcome. So I'm just teaching them a lot of these principles. I also apply the Octalysis framework that we talked about in one of our early episodes together about installing epic meaning and calling, having this family pride, and we can go into more detail into that, how to make them feel more confident and progression that they're improving, how to give them this creative space of growing. How do they manage their ownership? And for kids, ownership is precious because they don't own that many things. So once they feel like they have this toy, they have this color they like, they are very protective of it. And if you take it away, even if you gave it to them in the first place, right? If you take it away or the twins are taking it from each other, they start to, throw a tantrum. It's very personal. And how to deal with social influence, right? And how do you interact with each other? And they both have different personalities. How do you work well together? And all these 8 core jobs come to play about how to, in my opinion, raise children that I think are prepared for the world.
Sounds amazing, and sounds like there's plenty of different directions we could go here. You mentioned one which I think is really interesting, at least for me, and which is when you mentioned the family pride. And how do you have any examples? Again, it doesn't have to be super specific, but like a time where that came into play and how you went about it.
Yeah, so this goes into the Octalysis literature about core drive 1, epic meaning and calling. Because you feel like a part of something bigger than yourself, you're more likely to act according to the higher picture. Also, core drive 4, ownership possession, like your identity. So in a smaller form that I'm sure lots of families have seen, that's the sibling thing. You tell kids that, hey, you're the older son, right? You're the big brother, you're the big sister, so you should be more responsible. So it's installing that identity. They end up having their behaviors change. So I think we regularly see the oldest in the family, they tend to feel like they need to carry more of the responsibility. And the youngest one tends to feel like, hey, just enjoying life, intrinsic motivation, happy. And so that's just the ownership identity. But I take it to the epic meaning and calling about the family pride. So if you've seen like things like Game of Thrones, right, there's always the family thing about, the Lannister never forgets their debts. And what a Stark is, the lone wolf dies alone. The pack survives, but the lone wolf dies. And even going back to, I think it's like Smallville with Superman, they showed, Superman has a arch nemesis, Lex Luthor. And this was about Lex Luthor being young, and his dad, who's a very successful business person, brought him onto a helicopter, and he was really scared and covering his eyes. And his dad is like, "You are a Luthor. You're never afraid. You're never scared." Right. And I'm like, how brave a person must be or needs to be the main villain to Superman, right? Without any superpowers. Lex Luthor is honestly very, very brave because his father installed to him, like, you are never afraid. So what I do with my kids, again, this is a villainous example, but what I do with my kids, I would tell them, hey, you're part of the Chou family. And therefore, the Chou family, you should always be honest. You should always do the right thing. You should always try to be very mature with how you manage your emotions and do useful things. So even if they tell me, oh, why does like Bobby in school, he's not honest, I'll just tell them, no, because Bobby's not part of the Chou family. So he doesn't have to be honest, but you are. So you should be honest. Right? Nice. And so it's just installing that family values into them. So they feel like uniquely they're part of the Chou family, and therefore they should behave in a principle that's aligned with family values.
Has it, like, I love the example. I love how that sort of fits in so well and can apply to so many situations. I don't know if they're arrived to that point where they start, claiming fairness, but that's not fair. They don't get to do it, and I have to. Has that kind of situation appeared? Do you think it will appear in the future if it hasn't? Like, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think that incident that I described has happened multiple times, when they just say, hey, why other kids in school don't have to follow some of our maybe stricter moral principles and teaching. And then some other families, they just decide to not teach their kids this. That's early on, right? I understand. Like, I started when they're 1 or 2 years old. Some parents never take the time to actually teach values to their kids. Like, some of them send their kids to learn a lot of things like math, English, whatnot. And in my opinion, like, my wife Angel worries about a lot of things, like, oh, are they behind in math, the language speaking skills, how well they're walking? And I tell Angel that, hey, when they're 16, all that stuff will be fine. They'll learn they know how to speak, they know how to walk, right? They're toilet trained, right? All of that will be fine. That will solve itself sooner or later, no matter what. But what may not be solved is whether they can communicate properly, right? They're empathetic. They understand how to manage their emotions. Those things some people never learn throughout their entire lives. And that's the stuff we should worry about. Like, are we installing these values and giving them these tools to manage their lives better? And so I try to teach them this very early on. And some families do it slightly later, but at least I get to tell them that, hey, it's not about fairness. It's about, who do you want to be, right? Sometimes I say, do you want to be one of the good guys or the bad guys? Because they watch the cartoons, there's always a villain, right? And it's like, because it's when let's say, and of course there's always instances like Harmony takes away Symphony stuff and Symphony gets mad, so he pushes Harmony then hits her back, and they're fighting, right? And they'll say like, oh, she took my stuff, that's why I hit her. In the cartoons, do the villains, like, when someone's hitting people when they're angry, are they like the good guys or the villains? And she'll like, the villains. It's like, do you want to be a good guy or villain? And she'll say, good guy. So it's like, therefore, you should not hit people. When someone takes your stuff when they're being bad, you shouldn't like outdo them with being like a villain, right? You shouldn't become a villain just because they did something bad to you. And you should focus on forgiveness, and you should focus on sharing. So those are lessons we regularly teach them.
Sounds amazing. And with this whole discussion, one of the things that I was sort of prepared to ask you was if there were any sort of ethical considerations when you're thinking about gamification in kids. Of course, not necessarily your kids, but maybe an application of gamification, and any ethical considerations to keep in mind. I know you mentioned that you have these sort of thoughts of how much am I going to gamify versus what they're going to find in the real world. But also, is there anything that you feel that is sort of a red line that shouldn't be crossed when thinking about these things?
Yeah,
with your kids, it's kind of easier, I think, because you always want the best for them. But even if it's going to be applied outside of that, if you're maybe in a business setting,
it's like you described, right? Because we know that gamification design is about motivating behavior, and there's a lot of experts out there who talk about, hey, if you're helping them do what they already want to do, but just don't have enough discipline, right? Not enough motivation to do it, then it's good, right? You get people to exercise more, eat healthily, be more productive. And so that's great because they already want to do it and it benefits their lives. And like you said, we assume that parents have the best interest of their children at heart, right? You as a parent might disagree with another parent, but pretty much all the parents, there's some exceptions. Almost all parents out there, what they provide to their kids is what they believe is the best. And the kids at that point, they can't decide for themselves. So it's either the parents or the state that decides, right? And we know the state isn't always the best either. So assuming that for parenting, I think as long as you spend time thinking about how you want your children to grow, what's important, I think whether it's through what we call black hat motivation, loss and avoidance, if you don't do it, there's negative consequences, which is an important lesson in life also. Whether it's through scarcity, it's almost like a reverse psychology thing. Like you put limits to how many times they can do something, and in which case they want to do it more. Or through unpredictability and curiosity, you're just making it more fun and interesting and more exciting. I think those are all fine from an ethical standpoint. Now, there's ones that are more effective than others, or more short-term effective but long-term detrimental, like giving a reward for every activity. We know all this literature about extrinsic motivation, killing intrinsic. Now, I will say that it's still valuable to give children extrinsic rewards for things they do well, because that's also back to the real world. If you do things well, you get a reward, right? And I think they should be trained to understand that good behavior, good performance means a reward. But you don't want to give them a reward for everything. So what I try to do is, if it's about performance and they do a good job, then I think providing a reward is valid. But if it's about behavior, like, just listening to what you have to say to them, it's just an attitude problem, you shouldn't have a reward for that. Like, you shouldn't give them a reward just to go back to their rooms or clean their rooms or eat their lunch, because that's what they're supposed to do. And if they realize, every time I do these normal daily things, I get rewarded for that, that's not a good strategy. But if they use their creativity, they focus for a long time, they made something great with Lego, they finished their homework that requires some skill, exertion, I think giving a extrinsic reward, whether it be a toy. The nice thing about kids is they can't tell the difference between like a 2-cent sticker versus like a $10 like toy. Once they get something, they're really happy. So, but I think it's valid to give them a reward sometime. For me, I also have these emotional rewards. I regularly tell them I'm very proud of them. I think it's very important. They need to constantly feel love. That's very, very important. But I have this thumbs up, like thumb tab, like thumb to thumb. And we call that a ichiban, like top notch. And that has to be hard earned in the family. Like, they actually have to do something that impresses me, and they'll get a thumb to thumb press. Now, and they know this. They know this is a true like core drive to accomplishment. And I remember when they were young, like 1.5 or something too, Harmony says, "I finished my food." And for at that age, it's impressive to finish her food by herself. So I was about to give her the thumbprint. And then Symphony says, "No, she hasn't finished food. Look, there's still rice in her bowl." And I'm like, "Oh, no, you don't get it." I make it very strict. You have to actually accomplish the task for me to do it. And I tell them, look, when you're 2, that's accomplishment. When you're 4, finishing your food is not accomplishment, right? You have to do something more. And Symphony, like, I've taught her to, maybe because of our faith background, she learned to be like a sacrificial lamb. So sometimes, like, when Harmony does something wrong and she would have a negative consequence, Symphony would say, I want to take this consequence for Harmony, starting at like 2.5, 3 years old. And so Symphony will take the negative consequence, the punishment, but I will give her like a ichiban, like, "Hey, you did well, so I'm proud of you for tanking damage for your sister."
In definitely a very much completely different situation, and very fictional as well. It's like the Hunger Games, I volunteer for your sister, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's rare that 3-year-olds behave in that fashion. So I mean, and not Harmony doesn't do that, and Symphony does, so I can't say it's all parenting. Also personality. What blows my mind away is that their personalities were, well, first of all, they're fraternal twins, so they're biological sisters but not identical twins. But their personalities were different since the first 10 minutes in the hospital. So, and ever since, if you describe the behavior to me, I can probably tell you which twin it is. So I have to constantly be thinking about one strategy would work for one twin, but not the other. And sometimes if they're in a vacuum, it would work, but they're in the same room. So, you can't use 2 different strategies for each other, because then they'll think it's unfair. So that's been my what I call Core Drive 3 empowerment of creativity and feedback. It's just been a constant, interesting game for me to figure out what's the best way to teach them. But again, Symphony, she's more into epic media and calling. She wants to save the world. She wants to be sacrificial. She wants to help people. And Harmony, she's more like materialistic. She wants to have nice things, enjoy nice things, and stuff like that.
Nice. It's interesting, within the same household, being born, minutes apart, how different they can get to be. Like imagine, like you see that and you say, well, how are people so different? And you say, well, if fraternal twins can be that different.
Yeah.
Imagine somebody who's, who you just met, right? You've never seen.
They're born 20 seconds apart, actually. And
there you go.
And this is why relationships are hard. Marriages are hard, right? Because now you're suddenly with someone that came up from a different family, different culture, different economic status, different education background. And now you're living together, and it's very hard because siblings who have the same cultural background, same education background, all that stuff, they fight all the time, right? And so that's why maintaining a good relationship, maintaining a good marriage requires a lot of wisdom and growth. Like you really need to constantly improve yourself and become a better person. And I think that's going to be the same thing with having kids. I think when you're single, you learn the way to level up and become to live a good single life. And then you get married, and then you have to learn new skills to basically, it's like you go to a different stage in a game, right? First you're in the desert stage, and now you're in the ocean stage, and then you're in the sky stage, and you got to learn different skills. So some people, once they figure out how to do this marriage thing and they're doing well, and then they have kids and they have to learn a new skill set about how to be a good parent.
Absolutely. And like you've been saying, how it's different for, relating with kids, with your spouse, et cetera, et cetera. And what would you say are some of the main differences when thinking in terms of gamification between kids and adults? Where is, like, is there's I'm sure there's a line somewhere for you. Where's that line drawn?
Between kids and adults?
Yeah.
To be honest, I try to not have that line be super clear. I really try to talk to them as if they were grown-ups. Like I teach them valid logic. And this synchronizes with this other, I forgot her name. All right, more like I don't know how to pronounce her name. But she is the mother of 3 very successful daughters. One of them is the CEO of YouTube. One is the CEO of 23andMe, and the other is a physician, a PhD, and a surgeon at UC San Francisco. And so she talks about, since her daughters were like 4 or 5, she would already tell them to like go to the local store, buy things, and basically treat them as adults. And she doesn't use any baby language like, oh, like come here and go poop. She just talks to them normally, and they pick up that like, oh, I should behave more like a responsible human being, not like a baby. So I tend to try to follow that. Sometimes because they're kids, we're a little more lenient, and we give them more chances. We're more patient explaining them how to do things. But honestly, I personally feel like a lot of kids are, I don't know if you say a lot of kids are just grown-ups, but haven't found themselves, or in a sense, most grown-ups never truly grow up, which I think is a good thing.
That makes sense. And from what you're saying, I'm guessing that one of the main things is perhaps being more lenient and having more patience. And here again, I'm hypothesizing, right? If that comes to a specific design, for example, you're creating something specific, maybe that means the system is more forgiving, right? It's more allowing you to, not only allowing you to commit mistakes, because that's I would say it's kind of core to part of what we do, making it okay to make mistakes, but you make it even more okay. The consequences are not, sort of terrible in a way. There's a lot of more space in that sense, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important is to give them instructions about how to behave, like very clear, like even sentences. You teach them how to say the exact sentences. So when they apologize, I would say, hey, you need to look into my eyes, because since they're small, I guess they do feel the shame or guilt, or they just don't want to deal with the human emotions when they get in trouble. It's like, you need to just look in my eyes when you say sorry. And sometimes they want something, they'll just like keep saying, daddy, hey, daddy, and they'll constantly grab my shirt. It's like, no, use the useful way to express what you want. And then they're like, daddy. I'm like, no, you're not doing something useful. Communicate in a constructive way. and they get stuck. So you want to say, Daddy, I would like to go out and play with my friends. Can you take me there? And they would repeat it after me. So I'm teaching them exactly how to say the sentences. And awkwardly, I found that also maybe not like as commonly because some people would feel a little unsettled, but I find that actually kind of useful in the workplace too. Just kind of going through, hey, this is the best way to communicate, because in terms of talking to clients, in terms of there was a case where I even told the client, because the client's been wishy-washy and not being consistent, and I think they weren't even sure. I think they're trying to get us to do more work without committing to a new contract. And then I try to make the client commit one or the other, right? So when she said, "All right, let's just see, like, why don't you do this? Let's see." And I said, "Okay, then I'm going to send you an invoice." And say, "Oh no, we haven't agreed to that yet. I was just," and I just said, "Hey, if you don't want us to do a contract, you would say this sentence. But you said this sentence, which means that you're purposely trying to make it unclear." And that's when the client says, "Okay, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. We will renew the contract."
Makes sense. It's the kind of thing that sometimes you need to do, right? Like you want to make sure that everything is clear, that everybody's in the place they want to be, and everybody's getting what they should get, right? And that sometimes is necessary, even though, as you were saying, it might feel a little bit awkward or weird in some cases.
Yeah, I think right now most people in the workplace and other places, they don't know how to do empathetic communication. So you'll see there's a lot of misunderstandings, miscommunications, and these miscommunications lead to bad emotions, and it makes it even worse. And okay, here's an example. What I do with my wife. I try to do this thing where we never fight for the same reason twice. I mean, I don't always apply, but it's about pattern recognition skills, right? So whenever we get into a fight, and afterwards, right, we resolve it. Not all the time. Sometimes when I'm wise enough and speculative, I was like, okay, let's go back to our argument. I said this at the beginning, and then you said this, I said that, you said, yeah, this. So I technically don't have to say this. I could have said this instead, and then we wouldn't have fight. And so, okay, given I said this, which was not good, you responded this. But if you didn't respond, you respond this other way, then we would not have fought. Okay, let's say you said, as you know, you said that. So I could have said something else. And if I said that, we would not have fought. But I said this. And it turns out that before we get into an argument, there's like 9 touch points and for one of us could have said something different, and we would have avoided this big argument. And I would literally just say, this would be the right sentence to avoid argument. So, and there are times where we're on sentence 2. I'm like, oh, wait, pattern recognition. We're getting to the fight now. This is escalating. And I was like, okay, I'm going to say the wiser, more empathetic sentence, and then no more fights. And that's I think that's progress in life.
Absolutely. It sounds like a very game-like of the pattern recognition.
It's all about optimizing gameplay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and this is a game like relationship, even with your kids or with your significant other, right? It's not a game where one of you wins, right? It's a game where you either fail together or win together. And I think in the moment, people forget that. And so you should collaborate to figure out how to optimize communication, gameplay strategy to win together.
That's very important. This is a cooperative game for sure.
Yeah.
There's no losers, at least not in the room, right? You can always, I'm sure you've heard of the strategy of sort of having the others, the sort of inexplicable, adversary, which you collaborate together to have, and that could be, imaginary collectives, or that could be, something you want to avoid,
that's
like having fights.
Yeah, that's what politicians do all the time. They unite people by creating a common villain. Absolutely.
And again, sometimes it if you do it right and for the right reasons, it could work, right? If you have common objectives to
it's very effective. Together. It's just that usually you demonize something, right? Whatever you like. Sometimes it's the rich people, the 1%, the immigrants, the AI that will take over your jobs, whatever it is. But then you just demonize it. And so if the threat is 2, you will be running a campaign and say it's a 10. And so that fear unifies people.
I agree. And again, as you're mentioning, there's many ways to do this wrong. way too many. Yu-kai, we're running out of time, and I didn't want to sort of end this before you have, I don't know if you have any recommendations for new parents, like hopefully very soon myself or many others who could be out there in the audience. What would you, if I said any recommendation for new parents, what comes to your mind?
I think if, just like all my literature, if you treat it like a game and not in the, oh, it's not serious, but if you have a gameful mentality, I think everything in life is easier. And this is my general literature, right? In a game, if everything is just smooth, you just keep walking forward and you win the game, that's a boring game, right? No one wants to play it. You add obstacles, you add bad guys in order for you to problem solve and figure out how to become better and beat it. And that makes the game worth playing. And in life, some people, whenever they face obstacles, they treat it as a victim mentality, like, oh, why do you have bad luck? Why is this happening to me? As opposed to, hey, this is an opportunity to be awesome and get points and grow. And I think it's the same with children. Luckily, most parents do see their children as a blessing. So they don't see it as bad luck, but a blessing. But I think on a day-to-day, as you know, it is, especially early on, it is very tiring. And there's a lot of stuff to do. There's a lot of new skills to learn. But I think if you treat it like a game, which I did, like I said, I'm constantly thinking about, okay, hypothesis, like strategy, do this, see how it works, do that, see how it works. I actually find it to be a lot of fun. And I'm just planning. It's like an RPG character I'm planning, right? They need to learn this at age 1, this at age 2. This is the environment I want them to be in. This and then you have the wild cards. Oh, something just happened. We moved to a different country, or economic status change. And it's like, all right, how do we figure out how to play this new stage and how to optimize for this? It's really interesting and fun. You get to learn about who your children are or who your child is more intimately, and you get to design based on that one player type that is your child, as opposed to just being a parent that, oh, I have to do this, and you're trying to just survive through the time period. I think it's, like I said, most of the problems that you have will be solved, right? Oh, they're learning language slowly, potty training, that will be solved over time, no matter what.
Yeah.
So you don't have to stress out about it. It's busy, but I think just taking a gameful attitude and see how well you play the game. You only get to play it once per child, right? so I'd say take advantage of that and make it count. And at the end of the day, I think you will have a much better relationship with a child anyhow. And hopefully, if you do well, then your child will grow up to be a great person that's well bonded with you and prepared to face the world.
Amazing. I love that those final phrases. Thank you very much for your expertise on the topic on all directions, personally and professionally. Thanks again for taking your time. I know we are, literally worlds apart. Spain, Taiwan, for you, it's midday. For me, the morning is starting at this point. However, engagers, Yu-kai, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Engagers, as always, it is super fantastic, exciting to have every one of you around, and thank you for listening to the podcast. Just thank you. And of course, if you want more interviews with amazing guests like our super repeat guest Yu-kai Chou, you can go to professorgame.com/subscribe and get started on our email list for free. That way we can be in contact. You can request guests. Maybe you can even request to be in the show if that's something that you'd like to do. And you'll be, of course, the first to know of any of the opportunities that we might be creating specifically for you. And of course, before you go on to your next mission, remember to subscribe or follow for free, of course, using your favorite podcast app, and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.